Ladies and gentlemen, let's go on to our last session of the day, which is a fireside chat among the designers and among the creative people that we have on our panel. And the topic of the session is technology trends in architecture, where we are talking about how tech is changing the face of design industry. And conducting this session will be the moderator, Mr. Deben Moza, who is the Executive Director, Head of Project Management Services, Knight Frank India. Mr. Moza has over 2 decades of professional experience in architecture, construction, project management, and corporate relocations across multiple sectors. He holds key proficiency in project management, construction management, architecture, and workplace strategy. So a very competent moderator that we have for our session. Our next panel member is in an alphabetical order, Mr. Chetan K. Singh, who is the founder and CEO of ArchChat. Mr. Singh is an architect, but he is now in the tech field. And in fact, Mr. Singh enabled the worldwide design and construction community to work remotely on projects, bringing architects, designers, product manufacturers, and clients together on the platform that he devised, which is ArchChat. It is headquartered in Singapore and has an innovation lab in India. Mr. Singh, a very warm welcome to you. Our next panelist, Mr. Hartmut Wurster, unfortunately, he will not be able to join because I've been told in Germany he met with a minor accident on the construction site, and he's right now getting medical attention for that. So, we really regret that he's not here with us today. But our next panel member, Mr. Kalhan Mattu, he's the founder of Office of Kalhan International. And in fact, his architectural firm has been Planet 3 Studios. Following that, Kalhan initiated 6 new specialist ventures in past 2 years, which are all technology enabled with an ambition to be positively disruptive. Office of Kalhan is the overall brand with new offices in Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Our next panelist, Mr. Maneet Rastogi, an internationally renowned architect, founding partner Morphogenesis, is also the founding member of Griha Council, which works actively with policymakers to spearhead initiatives with an emphasis on environmental sustainability. In fact, he is also actively involved with social, cultural sustainability and is fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and a chartered member of Royal Institute of British Architects. So some very eminent speakers and creative minds that we have on this panel. I will hand it over to Mr. Moza to conduct this session and have a wonderful conversation. Mr. Moza, you are on mute.
Okay. Am I audible now?
Yes.
All right. Thanks for the introductions.
In fact, Mr. Moza, before you start, let me tell you, we have right now more than 15,000 viewers watching us on Facebook and other platforms.
I think that's courtesy star power. We have Kalhan, we have Maneet, and we have Chetan here. So I hope the numbers would increase as we progress with our panel discussion. So welcome, gentlemen. Unfortunately, Hartmut couldn't join us. So I'll start this fire chat with a quote, which is, "Architecture must have something that appeals to human heart. Creative work is expressed in our times as union of technology and humanity." As the world is slowly reopening, easing lockdown measures, everyone is adapting to new realities. Imposing drastic adjustment to our lives, the coronavirus has introduced a new normal, changing our perception and altering our priorities. Driven towards questioning and evaluating our environment, we're constantly reacting and anticipating a relatively unknown future. 2020 turned out to be more transformative year than anyone suspected. The way we work, live, and collaborate will likely never go back to exactly the way it was. In architecture, there was already a foot change. Social distancing may have accelerated adoption of cloud-based technologies and remote workflows, but most of these changes that will hit the industry this year were already underway. Technology has always impacted how architects work and buildings they create, whether it's pushing the boundaries of what's possible or what's efficient. Construction projects often sit at the forefront of technological development. The digital age has no exception, and the architecture's journey from hand-drawn drawings to CAD has been dramatic.
Yes, I think the technology is very, very important for all of us.
Just a sec, Chetan. I'll just first go through some ground rules. So, firstly, I'm privileged to be moderating this fire chat, and I'm quite sure with the wealth of experience all the panelists will bring to the table, we'll have an interesting discussion and some great takeaways for the audience. I'll kick off this discussion asking questions that draw out some high-level themes and ideas we should be thinking about for 50 minutes. Then I'll open up the chat box for 10 minutes for Q&A to give the audience the opportunity to ask specific questions that they've been thinking about and would help them to navigate upcoming opportunities, challenges, to be more successful in their business. So let's get started. My first question is to Kalyan. The post-pandemic world will witness a greater resilience on collaboration by virtual rather than actual means. Despite evidence, air travel contributes enormously to climate change. The architectural field clung to outdated assumption of design architects' effectiveness was tied to physically appearing in client's office on a regular basis. The clients will still want best architects for their project, but travel will be strategic now. Zoom, Microsoft Teams, other platforms are providing we can collaborate, communicate effectively in real time. So Kalyan, with convergence of autonomous building robots, 3D, 4D printing, AI-guided design, unprecedented smart materials, we're about to witness a mass disruption of construction and real estate. So what are your views about that? You're smiling.
Okay. There is a paradigm that we live in, and that paradigm of design and construction and engineering and all of that, which are separate silos. And there is this new wonderful thing that's on the block now, which we look at with fascination and fear both. So it's drama, essentially. So what happens then is that we're not fully able to comprehend the essential quality of what we are looking at. While robots and 3D printing and all of those are the sexy outcomes of new technological ways and means, but by no means, again, are they in some or any way a definitive example of what's going to happen. It might happen in time, but we are too suckered by this notion of looking at something which is out of the ordinary. So it's called the bizarreness effect in psychology. I would much rather look at the more here and now things that are happening in technology. So clearly no developer is going to be using robots to build buildings ever soon. I mean, it take time to getting there. It's a good story for sure, and we will all love a good story. 3D printing, yes, but 3D printing of scale will take time, and I'm not saying, I'm not disregarding it. But what we are denying completely is the convergence that is happening right now. Is the convergence wherein design, not just design, what leads to design, which is the front-end engineering and understanding of a project, merging with the program development, merging with design, merging with what is called design for manufacture in some sense, merging with the same information system, going to manufacturing or on construction, and in a way which is unified and singular. I think that's the big one right now. And this is not something which might look too sexy from outside, because it looks like a lot of drawings or 3D models to all. But the huge change that is coming is not really now in 3D printing, which it will. And by that time, there might be other technologies also. But it's mostly in the technologies that we are already using right now that are available to us. How many people can really have access to a 3D printer right now to achieve any objective that they have in terms of design and construction? It's impossible. That's the sexy technology. So not trying to demean that in any sense. What I wish to kind of emphasize is technology has many means. Technology has many expressions. The expressions available to us will be a lot more formidable than the ones that we are currently looking at. For instance, computational design. For instance, design for manufacturing. For instance, data analytics. All of these are coming together in ways that I don't think all of us fully comprehend right now. And as about how the construction is going to happen, of course, we are behind the curve on that. But just to think that we have prefab precast as the final solution of things means that we really have not understood the entirety of the possibility that exists with us.
So what I understand from you, even this pandemic wouldn't trigger a dramatic change in adoption of...
It would. I mean, usually, I mean, if history is something to be referred to, in every such pandemic that happened before, there have been dramatic changes in world history. I mean, from Black Death in Europe to the Spanish flu, which was not Spanish or whatever it was, and to the fact that we carry disease all of to Americas and everywhere else, it always leads to dramatic changes in society and also the all the manner in which the society works. So it's extremely important for us to be cognizant of history. It will change things. Whoever thinks that we'll go back to normal, which again, by the way, I have a very strong view that the normal was already kind of decaying in some way, is probably not understanding the impact of what has happened to us right now. The world economy is hugely interrelated. It works in a way that most of us do not understand. It's debt-based, essentially. It's derivatives-based. It's share value-based. And such things will impact us far greater than what we can imagine. So getting back to that, I'm sorry, I took a rather circuitous route, but getting back to our own profession.
Yeah.
Yes, I say what is happening now, which is you and me talking over Zoom instead of meeting over a cup of tea, was happening since a while, only that we were not really comfortable because of our conservative kind of a understanding of the world, and therefore we prescribed it. We said, hey, look, I cannot connect with Dipen unless I have a cup of tea with him. But the fact is that over time, we have already become more socially integrated technologically than we would like to admit. This is just the tipping point.
So my question to Manit is, should we use technology just for the sake of using it, or it's sort of an enabler for us? As a designer, you still need that human-centric touch, right? Technology cannot replace, a creativity.
Well, Devin, I think that's quite a narrow view of technology. If you look at the technology of a piano, a note on a piano, and the technology is driven by how wide your hand is, and it's been like that for several hundred years. So technology is not to be misunderstood with electronics or digital. Technology is essentially the process by which a certain product or a certain output happens. Now, if it is backed by a PCB or ICs or digital technologies, that's a form, but there are many other forms of technology. And I mean, ants building an anthill is a phenomenal technology. I mean, it's still baffling to date how well they do it, and create an anthill which keeps the Queen's chamber at plus minus 1 degree Celsius in a diurnal variation of 50 degrees. So technology has to be broadly understood. What happens in times like these, and these are why these times are really interesting, is that thank God we will not go back to where we were. Because where we were was not very good. I mean, if you look at everything that humanity, or particularly in India, and let's get India-centric here, so for your air, right, you put an air filter. If you're feeling hot, you have an air conditioner. If you're feeling cold, you have a heater. If you're feeling insecure, you have a guard or a CCTV. For water, you have a purifier. I mean, the basic necessities of life had reached a point where we were, in some senses, exoskeletons reliant on infrastructure just to keep us normal. We were washing a food with liquids to wipe them off chemicals, So that's where we were on a livability basis, and on a built environment basis. Again, I mean, the lesser said about the state of Indian cities today, the better it is. And I know I loathe the arguments about when will we become a Shanghai or when will we become a Hong Kong. God forbid if we become a Shanghai or a Hong Kong. The question really is that times like this is where we need to find our inherent processes, our inherent technologies that are adaptive. And I completely agree with Cullen. This is, we all jump to IoT and 3D printing, and I'll give some anecdotes from there. But the point really is that we have to find our own inherent technologies today that are well adapted today. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples. There's a village in Khajuraho, which I visited about 30 years back, which has a very ingenious air conditioning system built out of earthenware pot matkas, half broken, where the water flows down, they get wet, they've got plants hanging around, and that brings cool air in. There's a phenomenal air conditioning system. It's a technology, adaptive, cost optimized, resource optimized, right? So the question now is, where are we and what are we going to do from here? Now, if I come to the point about, say where I was, 25, 20, just out of college 25 years back. And at that point, our inspiration, hence the term morphogenesis, the name of our firm, is the origins and development of form in response to nature. And we were examining the process of nature using computational design. So artificial intelligence, neural networks, genetic algorithms, cellular automata. And the idea really was to emulate the processes of nature and try and come up with society, with form, with architecture that can emulate the beauty of nature, because nature's got it right and we seem to get it wrong all the bloody time. Okay, and over the years, what's happened the last 2.5 decades of practice is that a lot of that is now beginning to happen, and Cullen is right. We don't even know it. And that's the beauty of it. And that's actually really the beauty of India, that, we don't, we do something because we have to, because we live in limited resources, we do something really brilliant. But we're not like the West or rather the Northern Hemisphere. We shout at it from the top of our head and give it a nice, sexy branding of technology and push it up. So let me give you a few examples now, if I may, or you can tell me I can come back in your next round. So, what I'm broadly, so before I get into any specifics, I'm sure you'll go around the room again. I'll give you some then, okay? And I'll give you some concluding remarks. I think that what's happening right now, as Indians, and I've said this many times, or not even Indians, people of this region and people who live in the tropics, our technological response to adverse conditions, it comes out of resilience. We're highly resilient. And what emerges from there is an incredible new set of technologies that enable us to adapt. This is a good reset moment for us and a great moment in time for us to re-examine everything that we've done wrong to find a path to the future, which I think is exactly what's going on right now.
So let's have Chetan's views on this before I come back to you on the design part. So Chetan, how do you think the technology would change the way we work?
See, I 100% agree with Kalan and Munit, what they've said. See, technology, let's keep aside for a time being. What we should be looking at is, what is the problem which we have? And when we talk about the problem, we talk about the enterprises, small businesses, solo practitioners, the employees who are working for organizations. So what kind of problems do they have? And where is it that the outputs are getting impacted? And going backward from there, the bigger problems will have to be addressed earlier. Then gradually the more and more so-called the high-tech technology issues will keep creeping in and coming in. So currently we are in the pandemic stage where everybody is sitting at home. We are today having this, conference on a Zoom call instead of having in an auditorium or somewhere. So the need of the day is that the show has to go on. And when the show has to go on, then what all do we need to do to actually make the show go on? And that is that the people should get connected much more easily. I would give all the credit to WhatsApp, because you send a message and somebody gets it instantly and somebody then replies and then things happen. Zoom is another example where which has made the things very easy for everybody to connect. So what Manit said is actually it's the process that how you do things and how the things can be done more efficiently, how the things can be done better. So in my view today, connecting people while they are working with each other is most important. Another thing which I would say the technology should be helping today is break the barriers of the geographical boundaries, so that you go to greener pastures to get some new projects, new assignments, new things. So these are two areas I would say they are very, very important to be addressed. And then the 3Ds and robotism and all those things will gradually come. They can't come in just 1 day or 2 days, but these things can be managed better and managed in a manner that every firm, every company can find innovative ways to handle their own affairs in a manner that they are better connected while they are working on projects.
Right. My next question is to Manit. As like, we will see a positive change in terms of built environment, and you spoke about it. The question is that how would the new built environment make it safe and vibrant? The post or while we are going through this pandemic, realize that how important safety is. So, would we see a lot of smaller and horizontal developments, a lot of mixed-use developments where people don't have to travel distances and use public transport, have to be confined to certain, you have within a city, you have sub-cities created, so that to avoid people traveling long distances, especially in Delhi and Mumbai, where you spend almost 5 to 6 hours on road from one place to another. How do you think the architects would change, or how the infrastructure would change?
Well, first and foremost, architects aren't involved in the city planning process of India, which is why our cities are the way they are. Our cities are controlled by a mathematical construct of finance and various other factors affiliated with that. And in fact, if one could write an algorithm for it, it would be one of the most beautiful pieces of human creation as to how a master plan of a city gets done in India. Okay, but I will not go there. All right. I think everyone understood what I'm trying to say, and you know that better than me. Okay. So, the way I really see things moving forward from here, as architects, we're normally just given the 4 boundaries of, the plots that we are supposed to work in. And that sort of comes from a very historical idea of looking at cities as master plans, as land use plans, rather than as urban developments, where the horizontal plane of the city is more democratic and available to everyone. So we sell off lands, in our city, put boundary walls around them, and the only democratic space of the city left is actually the road. We even put, boundary walls around our parks. We put boundary walls around everything because those are privately owned or owned by the government, which no one can access, and essentially it becomes the road. However, what we've begun to see in some of our large-scale projects is that the outdoor is suddenly beginning to find meaning again, and has become far more important. But there's a lot of emphasis on use of outdoor space, because outdoors are far more safer than indoors are today. Right. So, there's this campus that we are doing in, completing now. It's about 100 acres in Hyderabad for Wipro. And this was driven by their own, sustainability team. And we were very happy to work on it. So the idea really was that could we, by passive design to begin with, and then using computational simulation to determine that can we make the outdoor comfortable through the year for 100% of the time. So that required about a 10-degree reduction in perceptible temperature, which we did by shading, evaporative cooling, dry misting, rain protection through lightweight structures. And we eventually reached a point, and it's now operational, and it's now under post-occupancy measurement. We could bring 10% of the building. So it's about, 2 million square feet. We've got about 10%, 200,000 square feet. We didn't build because we brought it outdoors. So the gym, the cafes, the food courts, the auditorium, meeting rooms are in the open and usable through the year, Okay. And we find a lot of that is going to happen, and we're finding it across the board. We're finding it in residential developments, we're finding it in institutional developments. Malls are going to, we think malls will turn back inside out. They will get back into the outdoor bazaar. The highest prices of retail are generally in areas which have a lot of outdoor attached to the retail or the restaurants or whatever, rather than the fully encompassed closed box. And that technology is going to disintegrate, but the outdoor technology has become incredibly good. We have outdoor air filters, we can do dry misting as opposed to normal wet misting. We can temper the external outdoor with technology and make that democratically available to people, and therefore open up that horizontal plane of the city in an adverse climate of what most of our cities sit in India. And we see a great thrust there. And I think Indians are the masters of that. Indian architects are the masters of passive design augmented by technology. We are hopeless when you try to tell us to make a sealed box and treat it as if it could be either in Dallas or it could be in Alaska, or it doesn't really bloody matter, because it's a nice solid sealed box driven by the air conditioning industry and or the lobby, and there are a lot of lobbies that's driven architecture that way. Right. And we are deconstructing this in India because we are being able to use a combination of passive design and technology and computational design simulations, algorithms to drive that forward. So I see a big thrust in that area. I see a big thrust in how we are still looking at residential design. What's happened to residential design or residential in India? There is a fundamental gap, and you would know this very well, Devin, of availability of affordable and rental housing. Affordable rental housing is our biggest problem today. And we saw that with migrant labor, what happened in the pandemic. Forget the middle class upwards, the rich, and that's another story. And there's a big thrust as to how do we crack this model. Now, the ROI, no one's going to enter this space if the ROI on building an affordable rental housing model is going to be under 12 to 18% with a 7 to 8 year payback. No one's going to enter it as a, I got a poll on my thing. Yeah. So the big thrust right now that we're working on with various of our clients, various developers, is how do we crack that magic number of building housing 45 meters high under 1,800 rupees a square foot. So that's how that whole financial model will work. And now that's finance, form follows finance, right? And out there, some very interesting things have come up. We've started looking at all the 13 elements that go into it: structure, MEP, facade, blah, blah, blah. And we said, what are the factors that influence cost? Do we really know that? But everyone is on a per square foot basis of cost, and that's not really true. So the ratio of facade to floor plate or to, the entire envelope to volume, shared walls, optimization of the structural form to get structural symmetry if you're in a seismic zone, number of party walls, there are common shafts, elimination. So there's so many factors and variables, and that's really where computational design is super, because dealing with conflicting criteria is what AI algorithms are bloody good at. So we're running those models to see if we can, and we've got to about 1850, 1900. We're trying to break the 1800 barrier on 45 meters to 80 meter high buildings. So that's exciting times, to be able, because now this is being driven by the pandemic. It's not being driven before. For some stupid reason in India, on a 9% interest mortgage rate, you had a 2% return on rental. And we've been like this for I don't know, God knows how long. But now we've got a serious shot at this.
So that brings me to a question to Kalan with, in Mumbai, you are short of space. How do you get in outdoors, indoors? How do you connect that? The moment you do that, you might be stepping into somebody else's flat, right?
Okay, Mumbai is the strangest of all urban situations, and Manit will understand this well. We have 100 square kilometer national park in the dead center of the city. No other city has that. No other metropolis has that. And we have basically just 2 accesses to it. It's as incredible as it can be. There are, so per capita, open space, Mumbai is one of the lowest in the world. Mumbai has the maximum number of cars per kilometer for any large metropolis of the world. I mean, Delhi has a maximum number of cars, but Delhi has maximum number of roads as well, for God's sake. Mumbai has the lowest per capita livable space anywhere in the world, literally for any large metropolis. and on any of the metrics, and this is empirical evidence. This is not, I'm not talking out of my hat here. So Mumbai is the worst case scenario for a quality of life situation. So now, how do I get there? That's what you asked me, right? How do I access an open space?
Yeah.
For long, I literally lived next to a national park. So I have been moving around the national park. I'm in Powai currently, which is still somewhere near national park, but I can enter national park through Powai. If you're asking me, what's the solution for Mumbai? I mean, I don't think anybody has an answer. And if it was not bad enough, they've exacerbated the situation with starting so many projects at the same time that I escaped. So I'm not a Mumbaiker anymore. I'm just a caveat right now. So I don't live there much because I thought it was a completely unlivable city in terms of the mass rapid transport system, in terms of the quality of life that I can have, other than a few occasional bars now. I think Gurgaon is doing much better than Mumbai ever could. And frankly, just the fact that, cities are engines of growth. I suppose Manit will also will bear me out here on this. As engines of growth, Mumbai had its time. And now, since about 20 years and after the death of Mills, actually, it's just been in a consistent decline. It's not an engine of growth. It will not get the best talent because people will not get the best quality of life. The young, exciting people who build up cities with their energy will not come to Mumbai. And I escaped even when I was not so youthful. I just made an escape out of Mumbai simply because I think the problems, even to me as a designer and also an urban designer, seem unsurmountable with the current political dispensation and the bureaucratic system that is in place. It's impossible. It's literally the worst case scenario. But I had the national park to escape to. So I used to walk there at 5:30 in the morning with 72 leopards in there. Beautiful place. You must try it. 5 degrees lower than the rest of the city.
All right. So my question is to Chetan in terms of, how do you integrate the design with the construction, with how with the collaboration you expect with the technology, and post-COVID, it's become more important that the collaboration and remote working, what we talk about, has made it very challenging for architects and the project managers to work in collaboration with each other. How do you manage that? Can't hear you. You're on mute, please.
Yeah, sorry. So the first and foremost thing is that we should crack the puzzle of connecting people. And they should be able to share designs, drawings, tasks, and everything which they are working on with each other. And they should be on the same page. Because what happens is that people are working at different locations, and they were always working at different locations even before COVID. So if you look at the collaborators in a project, then first and foremost, there is a client, then there is an architect, then there are contractors, maybe one or maybe more, and then there are a couple of engineering consultants, and then there are those hundreds of product sellers which are pitching for the project. And everybody is sitting in their own locations and at different places. And everybody has their own teams also. So they are at different locations, and that is why out of sight, out of mind problems start happening. So there is a disconnect which happens. People send emails which I generally call them snail mails. They are replied at their own sweet will. People reply, people sometimes don't reply. And then WhatsApp messages, they have the problem is that everybody on a project cannot be in a single WhatsApp group because people are of different nature, and you can't, everybody seeing what the message is. So that's another problem. Third problem, as a senior project manager, which you would, Debin, which you will agree with me, is the task assignment and the task monitoring. Because everybody has to do a lot of tasks. And then when there are so many teams, then the tasks are assigned either verbally or through emails or through spreadsheets, and then they are forgotten. So if we are able to find a viable solution for these problems, then the problems will get sorted out. So that is what I keep on doing in research. And bigger than this, well, everything will happen so long as there is a project in hand. In COVID, post-COVID, the biggest problem is that small firms or individuals, they are finding it extremely difficult to either get a new project or get a new job. So how do they get it? The first and foremost question today, I think all the listeners would have is, what is it that you're talking about the technology? Where do we get the new project? My job has gone away. How do I get a new job? So these are the areas where the technology could possibly come in. And, the people who are more better off in terms of their capabilities, they would come forward and they would help others. So I also see that with the technological advancement, there's going to be a lot of freelancing and outsourcing may start happening, not because of anything else, but also because that, people like to keep their cost low. So they would like to pay as and when the project is there and they would get the job done. So now how do we, even if the freelancing is happening and whatever is happening, to bind everybody together, there has to be ways. So, I mean, I am not here to propagate and promote my platform, which I have developed and which I have invented. But there is something in that direction which I am doing, which solves these two critical problems.
Thank you. So I'm just moving away from collaboration part to the new material for construction. It's something which, for thousands of years, we've used the same materials over and over again. And now we talk about, previous discussion was about sustainability, carbon footprint. So, change in current construction, the way materials we're using, like recycled material or nanomaterials or self-sealing concrete, or it's just limited to the discussion like these. We only speak about them and use them in reality. So just wanted to understand, are we progressing towards adapting these new materials for construction?
Okay, sorry, David, your voice was breaking. So let me just get the, I'll just repeat the question in a couple of lines. So it's a question about new materials and new material systems as they would apply as we move forward, whether they're memory retaining materials, whether they're materials that respond naturally to various forces, etc. And you use, I think I heard nano technology, etc. Okay, good. Yeah. So I think that in the Indian context, the materials are going to, I think we'll have to break it into two parts. One part is that given how supply chains collapsed in the last 4 or 5 months and the rebuild up from there, and I think a lot of the people in the construction industry have begun to realize that there is a huge problem if a supply chain breaks down. Because there are about 400 different parts or materials that say go into a building, and I'm just sort of being reasonably conservative here. And each of these come from a different point. And if you look at the weight of a building, okay, the weight of a building says roughly about 1,000 kgs per square meter. So if you were to take an office building that's about 10 square meters per person, that's close to about 10 tons of material coming in to provide enough space for one human being to have shelter essentially. Okay. Yeah. Now, what we will see a big move forward from here is that the break of material, labor, and then the tools that go into putting it together, we will see a remarkable shift in this. Now, And that's how the material will respond. So for example, in a lot of our projects, two things have happened. So I'm going to break this up very quickly. Residential projects, post demonetization, post RERA, post GST, and in the crapshoot market, and excuse the term, okay, a lot of developers are moving to the fact that, okay, if the interest rates have come down, can I finish the building and sell it, rather than do I sell it first and then build it? So it's a sort of a more manufacturing-based model, but you don't really sell a car first and then go about thinking how to make the car. You know, you have a manufacturing plant, the car is rolling, and you sort of and you buy a ready-made car. You know, that's the way it's sort of done. And a lot of the residential developers are moving to that model because it's the only way they can sort of beat the system. So they need now to take a building that was taking 5 years to build and compressing it into one. Okay, now that is counter problems about how will the person buying it afford the EMI over a certain period. But with interest rates coming down, it's all looking very viable. So we are now exploring that can we actually finish off a 20-story building within a year, and we can. And we're seeing a dramatic shift in how that is. So our toilets now are not going to be finished in a residential apartment building. By the way, it was manually done before. They're going to be manufactured pods that are going to come in a tunnel form and slid in and start. This is not radical technology. So, before Cullen starts shooting me, it's okay. But this is happening now. But they need to do it. Okay. Before we 3D print a building, we don't even really need it. I mean, it's not a technology that we need to do today. It's not, but this is what we need to do today, because we need to cut time, we need to cut cost, and we can't be reliant on long-term supply chains, and we can't be relying on long-term finance costs. So that is pushing this in a certain way. A lot of natural material out of mass scale architecture is going out because wastage, the time taken, if it's stone or wood, and it's moving to a lot of, contract materials. But on the other end so that's one end of the spectrum. So we are looking at high precision, and in a building, if you look at the 400 different elements that go into it, the tolerances of each are different. Concrete ka tolerance are like aluminum is different, glass is different. You don't build a bloody car like that. You map all your tolerances, and then it sort of sits together, and everything has a life cycle, and you know when to service your car. You don't know when to bloody service your building till something breaks down. Okay, but that's not how buildings are designed. That's the shift we will see, and we'll see that soon enough now, because life cycles in a building will become important. Why? Because most of these buildings, at least the commercial ones, are ending up in REITs. When they end up in REITs, the developer also becomes the asset manager. Now he's got to hold that bloody product till the end. So he's got to think life cycle. Now we're already beginning to see the fallback on the pressure of that coming in. So these are good, interesting times where all these things are coming into play. And similarly, on the other side of the spectrum, we will see a very strong rise of craft at a very, very local. So when you have this high manufactured, highly optimized, highly efficient buildings coming up, cost optimized, time optimized, then we will see the re-rise, or the rise of craft once again at a very local level. And I think it's the marriage of the very local craft and the very highly manufactured buildings is where we're going to see this industry shift to, driven not by will or want, just driven by the circumstances that we are in at an economic level, which we don't understand. Cullen is absolutely right. At a financial level, which we don't understand, and at a pandemic level that we don't understand. But driven by all that, this is what we are seeing happening in our projects.
Cullen,
what do you want me to say? He said it all. But do you want me to give you a perspective on how we are looking at sourcing of materials and how we are looking at using the same products and materials into a singular system? I can give you that perspective.
Yes, I think that's something which, is missing in this, fraternity, like the experimentation, and not many architects would do it and, do some research on products. So,
look,
yeah,
okay. Just going back a little bit, just taking a softer view on the whole story. The basic soft view is that we are stuck in a, what I call kind of a small, slightly focused kind of a, system, which does not allow for large ideas to take shape and gain ground. So this becomes like a boutique model, essentially. The boutique model will not allow any architect to engage with economies of scale when it comes to innovation. It's, there is an argument to be made for the fact that most of the great innovations happen with small teams. But there's also an argument to be made for the fact that most of those teams are connected with resources and materials and money and resources such that are not easily available to others. It might be an academic institution, it might be a large firm, it might be whatever else, or it might be the academic institution you went to and therefore created a network for yourself. So it might be focused in a good team, but it needs a larger ecosystem to be functional and useful. Now, coming back to the essence of what we were talking about right now. So the problem here is this. There's no architect who can have knowledge in time, real time, with actionable intelligence about, let's say, availability of a particular product or a material at a particular factory at a particular time in real time. It's impossible. So what you do is that you create layers of people in between who are essentially handholders. They take the thing and they give it to you, not in real time. So it's a completely, I think it's a disconnected approach. So the problem here then is what manifests really is that there's a time lag between your understanding of what you want and what somebody is able to give to you. And the time lag also kind of manifests into lack of knowledge about precise sizing, lack of knowledge about actual finishes that are available with them, with the actual specs that are available with a particular factory. I think all this comes from the artificial separation that we got or we inherited from case laws from Britain, where architects became who they became and contractors became who they became and manufacturers became who they became in separate silos. The problem here is this. If you do not have an optimized system that gives you information real time, here and now, and allows you to create BOQs almost instantaneously and help the client make a decision in real time, then we are doing a disservice here, because we are carrying the burden of and the weight of something that has been done for a long time. It's an antiquated model. So here is what we are doing. So we reached out to about 200 factories, maybe 300 by now, all across the world. So we have offices outside. And we collected information from them and created a system of getting information from them real time. And this is for all kinds of architectural applications. And so if I have to specify something, I know what the real time cost for it is. I know what the different variations of that material available are based on what the factory has given it to me. And why am I focusing on factories? And there's a good reason. And Manit, I hope you bear me out here. And also Chetanji, my submission is this. We are currently in India in a situation where we do not have a systemic efficiency of training people. So we do not have a systemic efficiency of ensuring quality. Tell me one architect or one constructor or anybody, for that matter, anybody who has done his own home, who's happy with the outcome. It's tragic. Why? Because
it all starts from the college level, right?
No, so I'll come to the academic bit if you ask me that question. Yeah.
Because I still remember when I was doing architecture, still, trying to understand what Flemish and English bond means and doing,
barn doors
and all those. I've never used those in the last 25 years. So is there something which is wrong with our education?
It's a top to down systemic rot. Actually, we are an antiquated system. I am amazed that we have allowed it to linger so this long. And I think all of us would agree on that. It's not just in those details. It's also in theory of structures. I never anticipated doing double integration when I came to architecture. Have I ever done it again in theory of structures? Would I ever need to do that? Look, we are wasting precious time, resource, money, and intelligence on things that are not necessarily needed.
Kalan,
yes,
there is what credit you have to give to the whole sort of academic side of teaching architecture. And it does train you to it does train you to be an architect, but more than that, it trains you not that you are incompetent to do anything else. I think that's the bloody problem with the program. It's not the training to be an architect.
Look,
it's the fact that it's so divorced from, I mean, you can't,
no,
you know,
reality.
So, for example, a civil engineer comes out, I know he can run a company, you know, he can,
he can
do many things.
Many
okay,
things, absolutely.
Right? He's been taught a process system, he can think math, he can do all of that, and he can come out, or she can come out, and they can become anything. It's like a stem cell in the human body. We are just made into a uni cell. And we can't.
But look at this. But look at this, how bizarre this is. So here we are with the ability to solve multivariable equations, right? Like none other. And we combine the humanities with the scientific view.
And, you know,
no, can we talk to each other? I mean, Dipen, you can just take a pause for the moment. So, so here we have the ability, but I'm saying the ability is wasted. This ability to think at 360 degrees is completely wasted. So we focus on very tiny sliver of what is, you know, given to us. And I think that's tragic. We should be eating these things. I have a lot of this.
But Kalan, architects gave that power away. We gave it.
Yes, of course we did.
We handed it out.
Without doubt.
We gave away everything. We, you know, I mean, because of this one inherent belief of the educational system. Not only that, but, you know, the act itself says that architecture is a product of a single mind. Now, how ridiculous is that statement?
Ridiculous, exactly.
Okay.
You know,
I mean, every kid coming out of college thinks that, you know, I'm Kabuzi, I'm Kleinroyd, right? I am, you know, whatever.
They're not. They're not.
No,
they cannot
until you begin to understand that you are a part of a much more complex process. And the act of making a building is an output of pursuing the process.
Absolutely. And it involves multiple people. It involves multiple people, multiple competencies, a talent stack really to get anything done, for God's sake.
We're getting into our Q&A session. So before that,
we could do it with each other. Yes, please. Sorry, Dipen.
Do you have any views on our education system in terms of it all sort of starts from there, innovation and everything?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll just go.
I have to stop these two gentlemen because I you.
See, what happens is that, you know, the materials are extremely important in building any project. And the knowledge of material is very difficult for one organization to get it. You know, what is the material in the market and how is it, and what the Kalan rightly said is that real-time information about the material is the key to quickly create the BOQs, to quickly, so that, and of course, what Manoj said is there should be a modular system so that you put things, Lego blocks together and you are able to build the building correctly. So the product manufacturers and their sellers have to become an integral part of the entire ecosystem in a manner that small architect firms are able to get the access of the new materials around the world and around India. See, Morphogenesis today, you know, if I'm a seller, I'll be lining up outside Morphogenesis and would be sitting to say, okay, this is my product, please take it. But what happens to a small firm who nobody visits him? So that is what is important, is that if they also become a part of the entire ecosystem, then the collaboration process and then the whole process will become smooth, where the materials to engineering consultants to everybody will be falling in one place. And as Manoj rightly said, is that designing is not one person's cup of tea. It's a collaborative effort. And in this collaborative effort, the product manufacturer and seller is a very important part of it, because they know their product the best, and many of the products are customizable.
Dipen, ask for 30 seconds.
I'll quickly, you want 30 seconds, Kalan?
Yes, I want it.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we are doing, Chetanji, is that we have changed the entire approach to doing certain kind of projects. It is typically architecture is top down, we made it bottom up. So based on the products available with us and the database that we have created, we encourage people to use those products to create the final outcome. So it's a bottom up approach. It's a part to whole kind of approach. I'm just saying that a bit of humility there would help us a lot to really appreciate the concerns even of the manufacturers, and also, you know, make it more optimized for everyone in the entire process. I mean, I don't know why we are so caught up in our own grand illusions about how the world has to be. You know, big ideas are needed, fit for appropriate, you know, fit for purpose and appropriate. Big ideas are needed in certain situations. For a lot of things, they're not needed, and we should really have the ability to discriminate where they are not required. We have created systems precisely for those projects where we don't need them.
Thank you so much.
That's it.
So
Thank you.
Quickly summarize before we go to Q&A. So are there any questions for the panel?
Yeah, I think that was some very disruptive ideas that we heard from our speakers. There is one question which has come to us, which says, can just out technology work in building material industry? Anyone? Kalhan, would you like to take it?
I would not know what is just in, just out. Sorry, I am sorry. My corporate speak is a bit. I'm a bit low on corporate speak, but just in, just out.
It's a version of the just-in-time technology invented by the
Just-in-time. Sure, yes, of course. I mean, there are so many versions of it. I mean, but you know, so.
So the Indian answer to that actually, Kalan, is you know, as it did JIT, you know, we invented shit, you know, somehow in time.
I like this.
Very,
fun.
Another very important question we have is that, you know, while other sectors, whether it is real estate, IT, banking, finance, they have their representative bodies which, you know, take the concerns of the industry to the authorities. How about architecture industry?
We have a regulatory body. It regulates architects.
Council of Architecture, right?
Yeah, it regulates architects. It's meant to regulate architects. It's not supposed to be a promoting body for architects. Its charter is defined such that it regulates us. So is that the question? I mean,
yeah, it is a question that is there a body?
No, so let me answer that. I mean, so if someone is asking that question because they want to sue an architect and go through an official body, they can't to answer the question. Okay, number one. Number two, so there are 12 or 11 parliamentary acts that deal with professional services in India: doctors, lawyers, auditors, architects, nurses, vets, etc. And unfortunately, the way the Architects Act was formulated in 1970, whatever, and has gone through very minor revision. And because they recently lost it in the High Court this year, is that only the word, the title architect is protected, not the profession. So anyone can design and build a building, but you can't call yourself an architect. So all that the council regulates me on is to call myself an architect. It's the title.
Absolutely.
That's about it. It is, and that is what the court has ruled on. Okay. So it's an 8-alphabet word is what I'm regulated on. And other than that, everyone else is free to do whatever they want in this country. And
it's a toothless body. I'm sorry, there are many more clients saying that, but it's the truth of it. It only can issue notices and not much else.
There is a second body, the Indian Institute of Architects, that is supposed to be the representative body, you know, which is like the equivalent of a FICCI or a CII or whatever. And it has its own challenges, you know, but the problem I mean, there's no point even, you know, it's not about creating another institution or another organization. The fundamental problem lies with the fact that if you do the math, architectural services are about $1 billion a year in India, you know, and that's about it. And I got that figure by doing a reverse calculation on the GST paid by architects last year, you know.
Which is tragic. I have similar numbers, by the way.
Yeah, it's about $1 billion, right?
Yeah, it's about that much.
You know, there are about 70,000 architects that are registered in India today.
Correct.
And we're pumping out about 20,000 architects a year out of the 500 schools of architecture. Okay.
True.
If you basically do the math, okay, it comes down to about 5,000 rupees per architect per month. Okay, out of that kind of architectural, in about, say, a year from now, when you'll be at about 100,000. It's not a complicated math.
No.
Now, if you're going to ask this body of people, you know, our colleagues as architects, to make a professional body to represent, Mari sunega kaun? You're not Mukti unless. So your power and your strength as architects, and I've argued this in schools of architecture with my students, wherever, we have to do a lot more than, you know, we do a lot more, but we're happy being armchair philosophers when it comes to understanding, you know, the think big, start small, scale rapidly. We think big, We start small, and that's where we end.
We could have an entire discussion on this. We could have an entire discussion on this. I couldn't agree more again.
Panel for this topic.
Exactly.
Devin, you would like to add something because you have, like Maneet has mentioned that, everything is dependent on all aspects, from developers, the client, to the architect, to the, constructor. And Kalan also mentioned that everyone has to be on the same page for real-time info. You have been, you're, the in-between. You collaborate with everyone. What are your views? We would like to know that.
A project manager is basically a punching bag. So client punches him and the architect punches him. So, I'm from the same fraternity. I'm also an architect. So project manager.
You escaped. You did well.
Extension of, an architect. So it's like, 25 years back, architects would manage their project. With the multinationals coming in, they wanted a specialist to manage it in terms of documentation and processes. So I don't think there's a major difference between, how a project manager and an architect would operate. It's just...
we can argue on that. We can argue on that. Hugely different. But okay, again, I don't want to start another discussion now that we are probably at the end of the time.
You disagree with me, Kalan?
Yes, strongly. Very strongly. Look, I admit to the fact that we brought it upon ourselves, but I also very strongly feel that we would not have commodified the entire profession in the manner that project managers did eventually. So that I have a very strong view. Then I can provide evidences for that. But I'm sure that's another discussion that we can have.
Yeah, we can have a separate discussion on that.
Yeah. So the dignity that we had still kept in whatever the circumstances.
So Kalman feels that being a project manager is
No, I don't feel so. I do my own project management. I have respect for that. But I'm saying that the profession by itself did not, maybe became more efficient, but not necessarily richer in its outcome. That's all I'm saying.
Chetan, your last words on the subject. You are an architect and you are also a technology innovator. So.
See, project management is the most difficult thing. So what Devin and his team does is I really applaud that, because that's the most difficult job. You have to be after everybody and everybody's after you.
It needn't be. Better systems allow you to do things better. That's it.
Yes. And they have to put people who are completely disorganized into some kind of discipline and disorganized, and it becomes a very, very difficult thing because people are used to the way they are working. And once they come in, then there's always a problem which starts. But then anyway, the things are happening well, and I'm sure the project management is also taking a more matured and more easier way, and the processes are becoming better in that.
Devin is the most radiant of all architects here right now, so clearly he's done well for himself.
I'm sure he conducted the session well. In fact, we had a live poll going on, and we have some very interesting views from our viewers, which is now more than 20,000 now.
Wow.
So we had asked, we asked our architects and designers quick to adopt technology. So 60% feel yes, they are pretty quick in adopting technology. But on the other hand, they also feel that once things go back to normal, they will, go back to the normal ways of working rather than digital platforms that they are using for interactions and collaborations. So 55% in fact feel that most of the design professionals will go back to the older ways of working. And so that's an interesting view. While they feel that, you're quick to adopt, but I think you're quick to abandon also.
I think that's
that's an interesting viewpoint.
Yeah, that's a very insightful view, actually.
Insightful view, that's true.
Yeah.
So thank you all. I think, Mr. Monga, you conducted very well. We had some very interesting views, and I think we are on the verge of having a disruption in design industry as well. In fact, in one of the sessions on sales, most of the panelists agreed that the new technologies are transforming sales, real estate sales, in a major way, not only in terms of listings and in terms of searching properties, but also in terms of recovering payments, in terms of digital payments, in terms of digitally interacting with the clients. And digitally viewing of properties, etc. And I think it's very soon that we are going to see in the design industry as well. We have money and the industry.
I'm in the wrong session. I should have been in that one. How to recover money using digital technology.
Yeah, that was one very strong point made there. So.
That's the digital money, right?
Yeah, well, but that's the real money, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was one of the most interesting sessions we had. Thank you, everyone. And we'll now go on to our awards evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dipen.